Okay. So you will be able to get access to this recording probably by next week on the, where does it go, John? On the ALE website?
I'm hoping that that's where we'll get a spot, but as of right now, I'll just send it out via email.
Okay, sounds great. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. You would think I would, okay.
You've got me on as a co-leader, a co-host on this, right, too?
Yep. Can everybody see that? Okay. All right. So we are going to be talking about supportive confrontation as a part of teaching team effectiveness in a co-curricular leadership program. Again, my name is Susan Lucci, and Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Steve Mortenson. I am an associate professor of communications at the University of Delaware.
All right, today we hope that you will leave this session with an understanding of what supportive confrontation is, some knowledge about how you might apply some of these concepts to the group lens of the social change model or to any particular method or model that you're using to teach team effectiveness or group leadership. You will get a series of emotional and communicative strategies so that you will know how to engage in skillful confrontation and how you can incorporate these concepts into a leadership program. The leadership program we're referencing is the Blue Hen Leadership Program that I direct here at University of Delaware. And I'm very proud to say we've been recognized twice as the Outstanding Leadership Program by ALE. 2014, when we were just 3 years in existence, and again this past year. So it's very exciting for us. BHLP is a 4-tiered co-curricular and experiential leadership development program. We are framed by the social change model of leadership, but we certainly incorporate about 4 other models in significant ways throughout our program. We start with Quest, which is a summer immersion college transition experience for incoming freshmen and an intro to leadership, which I spelled wrong there. So yay, there's that. Tier 1 of our program focuses on the individual values of the social change model, really focusing on developing your own self-awareness as a leader. Tier 2, which we're really going to be focusing on today, focuses on those group values of the social change model. We kind of use a revised version of the social change model, which expands some of the values to incorporate a broader look at equity and inclusivity. So those group values really are significant in our curriculum in both tiers 2 and tier 3. Tier 3 is an actual credit course that I teach, and it focuses on that community lens, community-based leadership. We also work on design thinking, critical analysis, and problem solving in that course. And then tier 4 is really a breadth, taking a step back and looking at change through your individual growth, group growth, and how you've engaged in community. And it's a reflective capstone experience. So that's a quick and dirty look at the program. Tier 2, which we call the engaged leader, as I mentioned, focus on group effectiveness, where students are going to attend weekly sessions that focus, curriculum focuses on what team effectiveness is, and then they apply all those different lessons by completing a project for a local small business that has an important yet not urgent need for a project to be done. We do focus on those original 3 C's of the group lens of the social change model: common purpose, controversy with civility, and courage and collaboration. And just a note, the courage part of the controversy with civility is part of the revised social change model, because there are certainly times when we need to have courageous conversations. Other topics that we cover include 5 dysfunctions of a team, Lencioni's work, finding your why and your purpose, talk about team roles, effective meetings, project management. We focus a lot on the value of failure. We have our students do failure resumes, 360-degree feedback, and there's certainly some supportive confrontation that could come into play there, presentation skills, and we do a lot of role playing. Specifically, the learning outcomes for this particular tier, that students will demonstrate an understanding of effective collaboration by completing a group project. They will identify a shared vision and working successfully towards that group goal. They will discuss, provide, and evaluate the value of feedback in working on a group project, demonstrate the ability to resolve conflict through application of strengths and shadows and 5 dysfunctions of a team concepts, and then apply knowledge of various leadership roles within a diverse group. Almost every single one of these learning outcomes is tied in some way, shape, or form to the content that Steve contributes to our curriculum. Steve has been a faculty partner with us for about 5 years now, 6 years maybe, and has really contributed significantly, I think, to the personal and group growth of our students in tiers 2 and 3. And anecdotally, I will share that a student who's a senior in tier 4 this year came into my office with a really difficult roommate situation today, in tears, wanting some help in recalling these steps, because she knew that she had learned how to do supportive confrontation, but she wanted to sort of practice it a little bit before she addressed things with her roommates. So these life skills become really valuable. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Awesome. All right. So I'm in control of the thing here now.
You are in total control, Steve.
Am I? All right. Let's see, because I can't make it move. I can't do the PowerPoints yet.
Okay. Well, let me.
But I will say this while we get this set up. I do this intervention. I call it a communication intervention. I also do this with my classes as well. And today, in fact, we were doing what's called Fight Club in my interpersonal class, and which is go home, do your Thanksgiving holiday, and get in a fight with somebody. So there's 2 rules to my Fight Club. First is you confront somebody supportively and skillfully. Second rule is you write it down, right? Third rule is you share it with everybody. So it was really interesting listening to all of the people in class talking about this.
Steve, right. I think I'm going to have to control the slides because I'm recording. So right. Just let me know when to go.
So when we do supportive confrontation, the beginning of the whole program has to do with a kind of psychological assessment of someone's strengths and shadows. Because what we find, and obviously the psychological shadows, one of Carl Jung's ideas, what we find is that when we're confronted by somebody, a lot of times what we do is we fall into defense mechanisms from our childhood and we respond very unskillfully. So real briefly, if you didn't get a chance to look at the TED Talk, what the psychological shadow is, it's an emotional defense mechanism. It protects a child's self-esteem. And it develops during childhood as kids get a sense of right and wrong and self and other, and it accelerates into adolescence and sometimes hangs on for a long time during adulthood, where it really becomes an obstacle. The shadow isn't about the evil parts of ourselves or sort of like a monster movie, like a vampire piece of ourselves. It's not romantic. It's the socially risky parts of ourselves that we hide outside of our awareness. So for like one example, one of my favorite questions is, for all those helpful people out there, how many people that are really, really helpful can't say no when somebody asks you for a favor that you don't want to do or you don't have the time? And they say, a lot of people say, yeah, I'm always saying yes to favors I wish I'd say no to, because helpful people put the ability to draw boundaries into their shadow. They lack the ability to say no, right? And so they have to learn how to take that out of their shadow, become more assertive and work with develop more of their adult abilities. So what happens with shadows is they become triggered during confrontation. So the first part of this is figuring out what your shadow is. Go ahead and give me the next slide.
Okay. Oh, I love Zoom. Hold on. There we go.
Okay. So to break it down real briefly, we have a fight or flight response, and that's sort of like the shadow in a nutshell. Like, what do you do when you're confronted? Are you a conflict avoidant person? Are you so worried that you're going to hurt somebody's feelings or they're going to get upset at you? Because if you are, that can lead to a really accommodating style where you don't advocate for yourself or stand up and up for yourself. And that's a real common problem with a lot of people. They see a confrontation as a fight, which doesn't always have to be. If I confront somebody skillfully and supportively, we don't have to get in a fight, right? I can confront somebody on something and then go, okay, I can see what you mean, and then change their behavior. The other type of shadow, and I find this doing consulting with physicians and doctors, is I can't be wrong shadow. So like if somebody disagrees with me or says I'm wrong, it makes me mad, it makes me angry. And this is, again, this can lead to a really competitive style of confrontation where you get overly aggressive and you lean in too hard, and you can undermine. A lot of doctors, they really suffer from the condition of I'm right and I'm unskillful. I'm giving the person the perfect advice for their health, but the way I'm doing it is making it difficult for them to even hear. So one of the first things we ask students to do in the program is to identify your confrontation shadow. Is it a conflict avoidance shadow, or is it more of an anger shadow? Go ahead and give me the next slide. We've done some research on our program over the last 5 years. We've done a couple quantitative, actually 3 quantitative experiments over the last 3 years. And what we found is that the students that go through this program and this intervention, whether or not it's in a class that I'm teaching or part of the program with BHLP, those people statistically engage in less domineering behavior than the students that went through a control group on this. So we've seen the same pattern 3 times in a row. And again, this is a big piece of confrontation, is like being domineering, being overly controlling, being inflexible. So we were able to pick that up statistically, which is really difficult to do for intervention. We've done qualitative analysis of supportive confrontation reports. One of the parts of this assignment or this intervention is the students document their efforts. And so I'll give you an example of one of those at the end. We were doing this program through the pandemic, and the confrontations the students got in were really interesting. Go ahead and give me the next slide. So the next step, once you understand your shadow, is to get yourself emotionally ready for what's going to happen, right? If I know I got to confront somebody on something, or if someone's confronting me, I might need to say something like, can you give me 10 minutes to respond to this? I see you're very upset. Let me get my head on straight and we can talk. So you got to ask yourself, what does the confrontation produce? If it produces anxiety, you've got to remember that this anxiety is from childhood. The shadow is a defense mechanism. And it might have been that I kept myself safe by just being agreeable and accommodating and letting everybody have their way, but that's not making me an effective adult now, and I've got to stand up for myself. So I have to remember that this fear, this anxiety I feel is just part of my past. Now, what if confrontation produces defensiveness or aggression? Same thing. That's the way a lot of us survived our childhoods, was by fighting for our opinion, fighting for what we needed to get, right? So getting emotionally ready for a confrontation means naming and claiming a piece of your shadow consciously, saying, okay, what part of me is it activated right now? Am I afraid? Is this the little kid in me that's afraid to be in trouble or make people mad? Or is this the fighter in me that feels like I got to fight to get my way, right? So getting ready emotionally is part of it. Go ahead and give me the next slide. And it's when we go into a confrontation, and I'll give you an example real quick. I was in a faculty meeting, and we had an older faculty member who was a bully, and thank God this person's gone now. And I don't do well watching other people get bullied. It sets me off because I was bullied. And so it triggers me, triggers my shadow, triggers my victim shadow. And so this guy was bullying somebody else in the conference, and I found myself standing up and leaning on the table and speaking very loudly, and I completely destroyed the meeting. So I bullied the bully, and he ran away. And then my chair looked at me and goes, "Thanks for screwing that up." Right? So clearly, I needed a more skillful way of dealing with this guy. So the next time we had a faculty meeting, I knew he was going to do the same thing because that's who he is. So I kept my shadow out in front of me. Can you go back a second? Kept my shadow out in front of me. Said, okay, this guy's going to set you off. This is, if your shadow's behind you, it runs you. If your shadow's in front of you, you've got your eye on it, right? So I knew, okay, he's going to set you off. Don't let that get to you. Stick to the plan. My default conflict style with this guy was to lean in. So the next time he did that, I said, John, can you stop for a second? he sort of stopped and I said, can we all agree at this table that we would like to have more collegial faculty meetings and to have more respect around this table? And everybody went, yeah, we would really like that. And that settled him down. But I had to go in there with my game on emotionally, right? Let's go to the next slide. The next piece about knowing this is to get yourself mentally ready. What do you want to accomplish here? You know, if I'm just going to vent on somebody, after that, they're not going to want to solve anything with me, right? Because I've just gone off on them. So the first level of this is to present information or advice. I also work with pediatricians, and they have a hell of a time talking to parents. How do you tell someone that the way they're cooking for their family is causing their kid to have diabetes? Like, how do you give someone that information without them going off? So the first level of confrontation is I've been observing something. I just want you to know, you do what you want with it, right? The second level, which takes more work, is okay, I want you to act on the information I've been giving you now. Now I'm going beyond just letting you know what I'm watching, and I'm asking for a change. The hardest one, and this is the thing that Susan was talking about earlier, is holding someone accountable. You know, like when someone is mean to you, when someone blows us off, right? So another piece of this is deciding on what your objective is ahead of time for the confrontation. Or let's say, like, again, in some of the confrontations I heard today, some of these confrontations started off really unskillful. They got mad, I got mad, we realized we were not getting anywhere. And so once we circled around to try and figure this out, that's when people were saying, okay, I need to be mentally ready and need to know what I want out of this. And I need to be emotionally ready so I don't go off again and yell at somebody. All right, go ahead and give me the next slide. All right, so we're going to talk about some message strategies now. And a lot of this, as you can see, there's a little citation down there, comes from a fantastic book, Crucial Confrontations. And they also have another great one called Crucial Accountability. So this is part of what we do. One of the things that is really advocated by folks that study this and that I found to be very helpful is to right off the bat, if you're going to confront somebody, you're going to trigger their shadow, you're going to trigger all their defenses. So right off the bat, I need to diffuse that person's defenses. And so we call this confronting with safety. And this is where we diffuse the other person's fears about what we might have to say, and we establish mutual respect and mutual purpose at the onset. And then we try and share our path, right? What's the story? What's the gap between what's happening and what needs to happen? But right off the bat, we have to diffuse their defenses. So give me the next slide. And so this is what we call contrasting. The beginning of contrasting is when you anticipate how the other person might become offended. And then you make sure to tell them, you say, this is what I'm afraid you're going to think, right? And then you tell them, this is what I really mean, right? So this is not what I'm saying. So I'll give you an example. Common problem with students is a bunch of people are living together happily, and then someone can't afford to stay at the place, and so they got to leave. And so they're really bummed out. They got to tell their roommates that they can't stay with you next semester. And what happens is the roommates get really mad. They're like, what is it? You don't like us? You're mad at us? We thought we were having such a great time, right? So the student goes in and says, look, I got something I want to tell you, but I want to make sure you hear it the right way. I don't want you to think that you guys haven't been good roommates and good friends, because you've been awesome. I've loved living with you guys. Okay, so I want you to know how much I value you and the time we spent together, but economically, I can't do this anymore. So I have to leave. So then you tell the story. So contrasting is one of those ways. Again, anticipate that they might get worked up, tell them that's not what you mean at all, and explain to them what you do mean. So this is sort of the beginning of diffusing a person's defenses. Go ahead and give me the next slide.
Steve, before you go, could I ask you could you give an example of how that would work in a group scenario? Like, you know, John is not doing his work on the project and doesn't come to meetings.
So here's a common one: is people are not coming to meetings and they're not answering my emails, right? And so what we want to say is like, yo, where the hell have you been? I've emailed you 3 times. You haven't been to the meeting. Like, what's going on, right? Which is the exact recipe for setting somebody off. Now, another way to do this is to say, look, I know it's been a tough semester, and a lot of times we get in over our heads. I get that. We're all working with that. I know it's been hard to get a hold of you. We really want to try and work together on this project, right? So I know that it's been difficult, but we also really need to communicate. So what can we do to make that happen? Right. If like today, Susan and I were talking about editing different things out of the presentation we're doing to make sure that it's streamlined and it stays focused, right? It's a real common issue. And sometimes people get really mad when you edit their stuff out. They get really peeved. And so I had to go right off the bat and say something like, look, you know, we don't want you to think that your contributions are not being appreciated, because they are. You've done great work, but we need to streamline this thing to make it more effective so that the client likes it more and we all look good. Right. So again, think of these different ways. There's all kinds of examples that you can go with this, but the basic strategy is to anticipate how they're going to be offended or defensive. Tell them it's not what you mean. Explain to them what they do mean. Was that a good example for you, Susan? Cool. Going to be the next one. All right. The next piece. Share your story. What's the gap? What's the gap between what's happening and what needs to happen? What needs to happen is we need to get these meetings fully attended. We need to get back on the horse. We need to get our project rolling because we're behind now, right? So that's the gap. What needs to happen? You and I need a better way of communicating with each other because email is not quite working with us, or we need to have some agreement set in place, right? And this is the most important part. Speak to common purpose. What do you and the other person have in common? What do you both want? If you don't have any common purpose, it's a very good chance that the confrontation is not going to be fixed. It's not going to be dealt with adequately. But if you can find that common purpose, that's really what you're fighting for. You're trying to get that person to get on board, right? So if we're talking about a project, it's like, you know, the common purpose is we all want to look back on this thing and be happy with it. We all want to look back on our project and go, yeah, I did a good job. We all want to have a project that we can talk about on our resumes, right? But if one of us isn't making meetings and not being part of it and not communicating, it's like, then that's not going to be the project we're going to have. And that's not going to be the project that you can talk about on your resume either. We all want this, right? So again, the common purpose part is essential to this. All right, let's go to the next slide. Here are some narrative strategies for the story and meeting common purpose. Make the invisible visible. Maybe the person doesn't really see part of what the problem that they're causing. They don't see how they're making more work for people. They think that if they wait for the last minute, it's no big deal, but they don't realize that if I'm waiting to give you stuff to the last minute, it means I'm making your life harder. A really important strategy is to link to their existing values. We talk a lot about cognitive dissonance in the communication department and how to create it skillfully with people. And one of the things that we do is we'll like say, if you've got a project or a presentation you want to make, ask your client or whoever you're trying to persuade, like, what does they think is important? You know, so if someone says, yeah, I think getting things done on time is really important. Yeah, I think details are really important. If you know what their values are, link their existing values into what you're trying to convince them to do, right? Or get them to talk about their existing values during the confrontation. Because once, I'll give you an example. I was walking down the street and I had this young woman who was collecting money for the Southern Poverty Law Center. And she'd come up to me and she goes, you know, how do you feel about, you know, LGBTQ kids getting harassed in high school? And I go, I think it's terrible. You know, it's a horrible thing. I wish there's more that we could do about it. And she said, well, that's what we're doing. We're creating this program, the Southern Poverty Law Center, to, you know, give to high school kids. So she got me to say my values. Then she's like, can I put you down for $50 a month? And I was like, what? And I'm like, no. So I felt bad because I said, this is important. And then I said, no, I'm not giving you any money. She got a check for $25 out of me. Like, you can't get $2 out of me. I got 3 kids. I got no money. So as soon as I wrote this check for $25, I'm like, yeah, so I wrote this check for 20. Yeah, I know it's a lot of money. It'll make a good story later. Just that's what happened. All right. So that's the way to use existing values. to persuade people, right? A lot of times people don't know that what they're doing is hurting other people as well. So you might need to introduce some hidden victims. Like, I know that you don't think this is a big deal, but down the line, this is making it really harder for other people. Okay, very cool. Next slide. The last couple pieces of this that you could talk about how short-term benefits equal long-term pain. But now this little piece here, ask a question and then make a plan. This is very important. When you're done confronting the person about something, one of the things that I work a lot with is where we talk about, how do you tell somebody they're being racist? How do you talk to somebody about them being sexist when they don't even think they're being sexist, right? And a lot of this has to do with, you have to ask them a question about how to solve this thing. Like, it might be if I have a colleague who, like, I've had students, like I had a student who would not quit saying colored people. And I'm like, okay, you can't do that. And so he didn't understand why. And I said, can I show you this video on implicit bias and language? And he was like, well, okay. And he watched it. And he's like, all right, now I get it. So the last part of this ask a question is very important because it invites the person into the solution. You get buy-in with them. It's also a risk because now I'm not telling you what to do anymore. I want to collaborate with you on what we're going to do. And maybe your solution won't be everything I want, but if we can make a solution together, we're going to get a solution we can stick to. So that last piece, ask a question, then make a plan. To put this all in a nutshell, and I'm always hammering my students and myself on this, support the person, critique the behavior. Support the person and tell them why the behavior is problematic, right? And separate them. You know, I've talked to people about racism, I've talked to people about sexism, and I'll tell them, it's like, look, dude, I know you're not a sexist person. I know that you respect all the women you work with, but when you tell Gail it's so impressive to see a young gal up there being so poised, you're not doing her any favors. You're actually separating her from the mark of excellence instead of saying you're excellent. And whenever you call out youth, someone's age or gender, that does nothing to make them feel any better. It's kind of like saying you're smarter than you look, you know? And so that's the way that I've been able to get through it. But I know you're not a sexist. I know that you value and respect people, but the way you're talking about them is undermining all of that, right? Can you give me the next slide? Thank you. All right, so here are some of the big 4 steps of supportive confrontation, and this is part of the intervention that we do. The first thing is to know your shadow around confrontation. Know whether, and it might be different around different people, you know. I'll fight with my boss, but not so much my wife. She knows where I live, so I'm more ready to like give in to her when it's like, all right, you know what, I need to hold the line on this, you know. So figure out where you are with people. Are you too accommodating? Are you too aggressive? Now, and there's another piece in here, and it talks about guilt and anger. And I actually had one of my students today said she was literally lecturing her mom on inauthentic guilt. Authentic guilt is when I make an agreement with you and then I break it. And now I feel bad. And so I feel guilty. And now I'm going to go into this confrontation already handicapped, right? Inauthentic guilt is when I feel bad, but I never made an agreement. And I also never broke an agreement. Like if I feel like my friend wants to ride to the airport and I'm like, oh, dude, I can't do it. I'm really busy. I can't do it today. I'm like, okay, you know, that's cool. Now I can feel, oh, I'm sorry I couldn't do it. I'm disappointed. I can be concerned. I'm like, well, I hope my friend gets a ride. That's kind of a bummer. But if I'm indicting myself before I ever made an agreement to break, that's just bullshit, right? And we get caught up in that a lot, right? So again, if I'm going in with inauthentic guilt, I'm already handicapped myself. Now, inauthentic anger, right? How often do we get mad at people and we can't even point out what their actual transgression is? I don't know. I just hate that guy. He just bugs me. When he's walking down the street, I just feel myself getting angry. So part of this is to be aware of your emotions, right? If I'm really angry at somebody, Can I identify the actual transgression that they made? And if I can't, then my anger is inauthentic, right? So aggression without a transgression, again, is BS. Someone else says, okay, I'm mad, but I can't figure out why. That's on me. Or I'm guilty and I've made an agreement. Okay, I don't need that either. Give me the next slide. The next piece is to name and claim your confrontational shadow. Do you find yourself falling into the drudge because you can't say no to people? Do you find yourself, like, this is one of my shadows. I'm a creative person. So if somebody says, I don't really get what you're coming from, I feel attacked, right? Like I take criticism too personally, way too often. So I have to tell myself, I'm like, okay, that's just my victim shadow. They're not trying to persecute me. They're just giving me some constructive feedback, right? Again, remember, if the confrontation creates anxiety in you, remember that this anxiety is from your past. It's all from childhood. And that now, as an adult, we can talk to each other, we have skills, we can be reasonable, we can be rational, we don't have to do that. Same thing with aggression. If you know it makes you aggressive, realize that up front, and realize that you don't need to be aggressive if you have the right words, if you have the right strategies to talk to people with. So name and claim your confrontation shadow. Going to be the next one. Choose your objective. What do you want to do to this person? Do you want to inform them? Do you want to motivate them? Or do you want to hold them accountable? Now, it might be, I find, again, working with pediatricians, that the first time they see a parent who needs to do a better job at something, they will inform them. They'll give them the information. The second time they see the parent, they will try to motivate them. It's like, okay, the health markers are not improving. Something's not happening here. What can we do about this, right? The third time, it's like, now I need to hold you accountable. So again, think about these in terms of levels of difficulty. And also that if this is an ongoing confrontation, you might have to do this dance more than once. Can I have the next slide? All right, now we get into sort of, again, the communication pieces of this. We want to diffuse defenses with support and mutual purpose. Part of this, again, has to do with the contrasting piece we talked about earlier. Anticipate how the other person may be mistakenly offended or upset by your message, and assure them this is not what you mean, and then be clear to tell them what exactly you do mean. Then again, describe the issue at hand, what has to happen, and speak towards that sense of mutual goals. What do we both really want right now? Go ahead, give me the next slide. When we actually engage the other person, right, and we're trying to share our story and what we think needs to happen, emphasize the goals and values and common purpose that you share with the other person while avoiding any kind of blame. While we're confronting the other person, focus on their good intentions and efforts. Keep your description of the problem to specific mutual purposes that you both share. This is what we both want. This is what's not happening right now. Close with a question that invites the other person to participate in the solution. Okay, go ahead and give me the next slide. All right, so we've got an actual confrontation report that we did last year, and so I'm gonna try and read this to you briefly. It's only a page, but this is what a student wrote as the final assignment for this. And it was a really great confrontation because it was about COVID. And this person, you can kind of see they really went through all the steps. So I'm going to read this real expediently. It says, confrontation can be one of the most difficult things to deal with. There are some people who love experiencing confrontation. Personally, I'm the complete opposite. Confrontation is something that needs to be dealt with, whether you want it or not. Luckily, I recently learned this skill called supportive confrontation. Supportive confrontation is all about supporting the person while critiquing their behavior. This is an intricate process. It's not easy, but given the right steps and taken the right way, it can be done. For this assignment, I'll be focusing on a time I used supportive confrontation to address my roommate during the pandemic. Then this next piece, he talks a little bit about how it was. You know, it's difficult. He visits his parents a lot. his roommate's not really being safe. He's going out and partying. The kid's parents are immune compromised. So this is his situation, right? He's trying to keep his parents from getting the virus, and he's trying to rein in and make his roommate more responsible. And this is someone who's his friend. It's a difficult thing for him to do. So here is how he says he went about it. I first identified my shadow around confrontation. I know that I am way too accommodating, and I have lots of trouble standing my ground. I know that as soon as the confrontation starts, I will just be like, I understand, and just back down almost immediately. Knowing this shadow helped me understand what I was getting myself into and to make sure I avoided that specific shadow. Step 2 is to name and claim my confrontational shadow. I thought back to my childhood and remembered that when talking to my friends, I would always be overshadowed by them and told I was wrong, and their opinions were always right. That memory made me realize why I fold so easily in confrontation and back down almost instantly. Now that I know where it comes from, I can recognize that as my past and move on to my future. The next thing that the student writer did, I decided when I was going to talk to my roommate, my goal is to inform him of my side of things, persuade him to be more cautious and understanding of my side of the story. This proved very helpful. I started by informing so he understood my situation and why this mattered to me. I could tell when talking about my situation it was working, and he was understanding because he kept nodding his head in agreement. Following up with persuasion to instill that this is what I needed him to do, and I was not telling him what is going on. Moving on to the last step was the most helpful in confronting him. I learned how to diffuse defenses and support mutual purpose. I anticipated how my roommate might take my statement and take it as me telling him how to live his life. I made sure to assure him multiple times that I'm not telling him how to live his life. I'm just expressing my concerns of creating a safe environment for me and my parents, and that we have a common purpose in keeping both of us safe. I closed with a question and asked him what he thought of the situation and if he could think of a good solution for the both of us. This last question really allowed us to collaborate and work together, and we really got to a solution. The supportive confrontation skill really helped me get through a difficult confrontation I've been dreading and helped me solve a difficult problem in my life. So you can kind of see sort of the nuts and bolts of how a student was able to use this in a real situation, in a real confrontation. When we did this qualitative study, we had 21 students writing these reports. 5 of them we had to throw out because they either didn't do the assignment or they wrote about something they were going to do. The other 16 people all wrote about an actual confrontation. 2 of the people wrote about being confronted by other people and how they use the steps to actually be confronted skillfully and not get angry. The rest of the writers all wrote about a confrontation that they initiated. Nobody wrote about a failed confrontation. They ended one of 2 ways. They either were successful in the confrontation, or this initial confrontation laid the groundwork for more productive conversations later on. So here's a summary of steps at the end here. Know your shadows around confrontation. Name and claim your confrontation shadow. Choose your objective for the confrontation, and then diffuse defenses with with support and mutual purpose. So, and I think that's our presentation. So now we can actually take some questions. Cool. I actually got I talk pretty fast, but I actually got that faster than I thought I would this time. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask about this? One of the things that I find is really, really important to do this and teach this in a leadership program is you have to have the students do the skills outside of their groups. You have to go have them do it with their families. Like, that's why I give this assignment over Thanksgiving break. Go home to your families, have a nice fight, do it skillfully, write about it. We'll talk about it when you get back, right? And so like I had a class with about 30 people in it today. Everybody had a confrontation of some kind, right, that they were able to talk about and were able to manage, and manage better than before. So, but if you don't do that and you wait, you just have the students try to do it with each other, they don't know each other enough yet. They haven't pissed each other off enough yet. Now they're starting to, because we're in a year-long thing. So now they're getting there. But we don't want them, we want them to use these skills with other people first. Then we want them to use it with their group people. And we also want them to use it with real stuff and real situations. So they realize it's like, okay, this actually works with stuff that's important to me, not just like, I don't want to do all the work on this group project. Anyway, I'm open for any questions y'all have.
I can share too that one of the things we'll do with our leadership students is have them role play with kind of the cheat sheet about the different steps. And then we ask them to come up with scenarios that they either anticipate could happen or they've experienced with other group work. And we'll give them some scenarios too, to help them feel comfortable with the process. And it takes them some time to see that there's an actual flow to those steps. So, and students really love to do role plays as well, but I think that is a really essential step kind of before they are expected to manage that supportive confrontation really well within their groups.
Yeah, we generally, because we're in a year program, we generally do the role plays in the spring. So we sort of get them all ready for this stuff in the fall. And then the spring, we're like, okay, this person hasn't been answering your emails. What would you say to that person to try to get them to come around, right? Or this person's talking too much in the middle of a group meeting, like nobody else is able to talk. You know, how can you get this person to sort of to back down a little bit, right? And so we would have them engage in these role plays. It's so funny. It's hard for them to do it with their friend, with their students. But when I say, like, you know, like I have a student, he says, my dad always calls me and he asks me all these questions, and it just like makes me nuts because I feel like he thinks I'm an idiot. That's why he's doing all this stuff. And then I don't want to call him. And that hurts his feelings. And it's like, part of this is you've got to like do it to yourself. It's like, okay, my dad activates sort of the dummy in me when he asks me all his questions, but he probably doesn't understand what's going on in my life. So he's curious. So maybe I need to like not feel so victimized by this. Just listen to some of his questions, right? Because I don't want to hurt his feelings. So part of this is confronting ourselves. Like if I can't confront myself, I'm not going to confront you. If I can't confront my own feelings of fear or anger or whatever it is, I'm not going to confront you very well either. So that's where a lot of this stems from. It's like, I got to be able to talk to myself and calm myself down before I can really engage with somebody else. Cool.
Does anybody have any scenarios or feel like this is something that would be helpful to them within your program, in addition to just maybe working with students on group projects or working together as a team? Are there other, for example, I also introduce this with a group of peer mentors that I work with, who are working with groups of freshmen.
I had a question. I was talking with, I have another colleague on this call too, and we were just chatting about, you know, sometimes when you're working with student or whoever you're working with, you tell them to avoid making assumptions when you're going into any conversation. And so I'm wondering about this like line of like assuming how people are going to be offended, but being incorrect in that assumption and making it even worse, and like how you navigate that whole space, or like what advice you give to folks who are saying, well, I don't want to make any assumptions because I don't know what they're thinking or how they're feeling.
You're muted, Steve.
Okay. Usually if I'm in a confrontation with somebody, I usually know them. I usually know them pretty well. If I don't know somebody, then what I would say is that I would want to sort of preface this saying like, look, I don't want to say something that's going to set you off. You know, I don't want you to think that this is how I see you. I don't want you to think because I'm confronting you on this, that I think poorly of you, right? Just this behavior is problematic, right? Like again, I find that there's plenty of overt and horrifying bigotry and racism and sexism in this country and in this world, but there's a lot more implicit bias that very well-meaning people are just not aware of. And so when I hear a student say something like that, it's like, okay, I know I'm going to assume that you're not a racist and that you have an overt dislike of different people, right? I'm going to assume that you want to treat people fairly and value them. So I want to tell you why your behavior is problematic for that, because it makes them feel demeaned, even though that's not what you mean to do. So that's sort of how I look at it, especially when I'm talking about things that have to do with racial bias or any kind of sexual bias, right, in the workplace, because I do a lot of work on that as well. But yeah, you don't want to assume what people know, but you want to make it clear to them that you're not looking down on them. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that you understand that I respect you, even though I'm having an issue with the behavior that you're doing or something that's happening. So that's what you want to make sure that they are crystal clear on, is that you respect them. So does that speak to your question, Lindsay? It's a good question. Cool. Right on. Anybody else?
I have one in the chat, Steve.
Far away.
Someone who's not able to unmute her mic. I'm curious if Dr. Mortenson could point us in the direction of some resources about this topic that would help us teach this in our classes and programs, perhaps an article of his or a chapter.
Yeah, I have a chapter in a book called Closing the Leadership Gap, and it's about women in leadership. And I can send that link to Susan if you want, and you can send that out to all the participants. You're able to do that, so I can definitely send that. I cannot recommend Crucial Accountability or Crucial Confrontations enough as a textbook. I focus on their sort of message strategies because they don't really do so much of the emotional side of it. But the person that showed me this book, she goes, here's the communication book they gave me in my emergency room nursing class. And I'm like, oh, I want to read that. And it's really right on. So that's a great book to look at. I think that's Patterson and Kenny wrote that with another group of people, but I can also send that off in a link. I'm working on co-authoring a book that should be out hopefully maybe early in the year, called Communication Ease, and it's me and another collaborator who's working on that. And there's a lot of strengths and shadow stuff in that. So there's a couple of articles if that's helpful. And the TED Talks are always good too.
And Josh just put the link to that book in the chat. So thanks, Josh.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. It's a great book for breaking stuff down. Here's what I found though is the problem with communication books and message strategies. And I found this studying confronting. When I looked at American men and women, and because I was doing a cross-cultural analysis, and Chinese men and women and what they thought effective comforting was, everybody agreed on what an effective comforting message looked like. Everybody said, yep, that's the most sensitive thing to say. But people varied on whether or not they were motivated to do it. The problem in my field, which my colleagues are loath to talk about, is that we talk about the last thing in the sequence, the communication behaviors. But if you've made me mad, I don't want to fight fair. If you've made me feel intimidated, I'm not going to fight effectively. So the problem with, and again, I love the Crucial Accountability book. They don't deal with the emotional side of this. If I'm not emotionally and mentally ready to be skillful and effective with somebody, I can have all the great message strategies in the world, but I'm not going to use them. So that's why we start our program off right off the bat with, okay, what are your strengths and what are your shadows? What sort of things trick you up? Where do you find yourself getting reactive and triggered and not skillful? Let's work on that first. Before the students do the confrontation piece, they do an assignment on triggers, on emotional triggers, what sets you off, and another assignment on interpersonal projection, which is like, how do different people set us off? And then we get to the confrontation part. Right. So I think the emotional parts of this are crucial, because if you're not motivated to say something skillful, you won't. So that's sort of where we come from that. But the books, the confrontation book is a good one though. Anybody else?
No.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone. We will get that recording sent out to sent out to you, along with we'll remind you about the books that Steve is recommending as well. So thanks for joining, and good luck on exam week, and happy holidays. We'll be back in January with our next session.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.